Welcome to Smart Franchising with FranSmart. I'm Dan Rowe, and I've masterminded the ascent of local favorites to global dominators. This isn't your usual get-to-know-you chat. We're diving deep. We're revealing the raw truths about franchise wealth building. With over 30 years in the trenches, I'm spilling it all. If you have an appetite for unfiltered tales and the hidden blueprints of franchise prosperity, buckle up. We're diving in. All right, welcome back to Smart Franchising with FranSmart. And today we're going to be talking with Don Fox, the former CEO of Firehouse Subs, my buddy, sax player, fellow NRA board member, and my co-chair at the record-setting NRA Marriott Golf Tournament fundraiser this year. We were such a successful duo that they asked us to do it again. So Don has been at this game for 50 years, and like me, started off washing dishes. Not a bad rags to riches story. There's a lot of rags to riches stories in this industry that we're going to make more noise about. But look, man, every franchisor dreams of building a business so successful that someday somebody wants to buy it. Most people hope to get to $100 million. Don got to $1 billion with a B. Don grew a company to $1 billion, 1,200 locations open. But whether it's 100 units or 1,200 units, it just doesn't happen if the franchisees aren't successful and happy and growing. So we're going to get into exactly how Don did it and learn some wisdom from the master. So with that, Don, other than the background I gave, how about a little bit more about your story and how you even got to Firehouse?
Well, sure. Well, as you mentioned, my first job was washing dishes in an Italian restaurant in Lakewood, New Jersey. I never saw it coming that I'd spent 50 years in the industry. My original ambition was to be a trumpet player, and I took a stab at that for several years till I was 22, working in restaurants the whole time because you don't make much of a living playing the trumpet. So I decided at 22, after 6-7 years in business, I was with Six Flags in amusement parks in food service. But at 22, decided that I would focus on a restaurant career. So I thought, gosh, I should go work for a restaurant company. So I joined Burger King Corporation down in Tampa, Florida. I had to take a step back from multi-unit operations in the theme park business to be an assistant manager in a Burger King. It was, even at 22, it was humbling, but I went in there, and as most of the stories like yours go, for people who start from the ground up, it's hard work, and it's applying yourself in a hard business. You know, restaurants are hard work. The key for success is you have to choose to work hard at hard work, and those that do tend to be successful. So 23 years then with Burger King, and then joined Firehouse in 2003. When there were 65 restaurants.
65.
So the Sorensen brothers who founded it, they were two firefighters. A lot of people are familiar with the story by now, but they kicked it off in 1994, single unit, as all brands are when they start. And I think what was more common than not in their cases, there was no vision of growing a brand and multi-units, and you're just starting off with that single unit. But the magic of a brand takes off. You do a lot of the things I think that those entrepreneurs have to do right are the same things that franchisees have to do right. Now, I guess we'll come back to that later, but there's great commonality there. So they did a good job over 9 years of getting it off the ground, forming a great brand, instilling certain disciplines and cultures in the brand. But I was the first person to join to run the franchising side of the business, and the first person with experience, and born of my time with Burger King, where I did a lot of work on supporting the franchise community there too, and had to get a lot of things course corrected in terms of systems and certain disciplines, build out a model for how we were going to build staff and an organization. And it did get to a point where, and I think it's great when it gets this way, where it's a little bit more rinse and repeat. You've got the formula down, and then it's being disciplined and getting all the right people in place to execute it with you. And then we went on a 20-year run to go from 65 to about 1,270 restaurants when I finished up. $1 billion in system sales. You mentioned that was a That was a big milestone for me. We celebrated a little bit when we got to 1,000 units, but my aspiration was always to build $1 billion brand, and it was great to be able to do that.
Yeah. What do you think you guys did right? What do you like when so many other brands who started off probably around the same time just never quite get there? Like, what do you guys think that you did different? And even in that, what could you have done in hindsight even better?
Yeah, I think that there were several things. Uh, the founders were very frugal. They were devoted to the business. They kept every penny in it. It was years before they ever took a distribution. All the money stayed in there. In fact, they had 3 restaurants that they owned personally, and for quite some time, that's the only place they drew their income from was those 3 restaurants. Took distributions to pay taxes. That was it, and that took a lot of discipline. But that allowed them to keep fueling it, and with no debt. They had no debt after I think 2001. So everything was just. It took great discipline to do it, and that became embedded in the culture of the staff. You had to be aligned with that when you're executing the business. But it also transposed over to the franchise community to be frugal and disciplined with money, and then that helped set the franchisees up for success. And when there were instances when franchisees weren't, we had the moral authority to talk about it and about how maybe errors they were making, bad decisions they were making. We had we had the moral high ground to preach a little bit about it and try to get them back on the right path. I will say we were lucky in some respects, and this was more perhaps before I got there, but there were missteps. They were in the early days. They did some things very opportunistically. Had some bad partnerships early on when they were trying to do individual restaurants. Some things that if they had gone the wrong way could have torpedoed it. So there was a little bit of luck to get through some of those initial hurdles. Get a lot of money in the bank to support it. Have resources available to overcome a couple of issues later on, and then it, in some respects, got easier.
Let's talk about franchisees. So without naming names, what are some of the attributes of some of your franchisees who really thrived and kept growing and the other ones that struggled? And then sometimes you have a struggling store and they blame it on the store and then a good operator takes it and runs with it. But maybe without naming names, like what are the attributes of really successful franchisees in your system?
Embracing the culture of the brand. Especially once I became CEO in late 2009, I knew it was very important to articulate, to define that culture so that we could better train people, if you will, or introduce it to them. And the ones who are most successful are the ones who embrace that. So our mission statement, which was to carry on our commitment to and our passion for hearty and flavorful food, heartfelt service, and public safety. If a franchisee bought into that totally and was committed and passionate about those 3 things, I knew their chance of success was elevated to a significant degree. Doesn't mean everything will still go 100% right. Things can happen out of their control sometimes. A single unit operator, if they're on their first unit, gets started and road construction comes along unexpectedly and knocks their socks off. And that was one of the most painful things, frankly, for me in business, when you had franchisees that, despite their own effort, weren't successful. It's a gut punch, and we would do everything we could on our end, but sometimes there's only so much you can do, and that's part of the business that I never particularly enjoyed when those things happen. But when a franchisee when they didn't do everything that was, I'll say, fairly expected of them. And it's fair to expect anything that's in the agreement.
Yeah.
Number one. But then there's other things that fair to expect too, which is you're going to be frugal with your money. You're going to commit your time and effort to the business. You're not going to get distracted. I could go on and on with a list of things. But if you're not doing the things that are fair to expect for success, then I would have less sympathy. And then it became imperative to try to get the restaurant into the hands of the right operator. And you just alluded to this, and boy, we had examples of this. One situation, this was years ago now, I remember in Texas, in the Dallas market, where it was a young franchisee, and he really lost his way. And it sometimes will happen because of personal issues, goes through a divorce, he's making a little too much money in the business, totally loses his focus. He's absent from his 3 restaurants, goes downhill. We ends up in a situation where he sells, and I have a husband and wife team that we're trying to buy all 3, but they were newbies to the industry. And as much as I wanted to get the other franchisee out, I knew I feared I was setting this couple up for failure to let them take on 3 restaurants simultaneously. They begged me,
especially newbies.
Oh, and they were both going to go through training. They were both all in to work it. So I did end up saying, look, at the time, even maybe thinking against my better judgment, we'll let you buy 2. If your plan is that you're each going to get committed to go in, because these need a lot of work to turn them around. And we went for it on the deal. And that first year that they owned them, because they were committed and did what it took and followed our lead. And those 2 restaurants were, I remember coincidentally, both 50% up in sales the first year that they had them. And it was following the playbook, which says quite a bit about the franchisee who had owned it previously and wasn't doing it. And of course, then they bought the 3rd, let them get it, and they lit that one up. So that was one of the earlier transfers, and it was such a great example. We talked about it frequently within the system, and it was great encouragement to other people looking to buy restaurants. And now it doesn't always work to quite that extent. It takes a certain skill set to come in and take over an existing business and do it well. I thought we were good at coaching people on it, how to go about that, and we provided a lot of support. We would treat a transfer just as though it was a new restaurant opening. We felt an obligation, not just to the business and the brand, to make sure it went well, but that new, especially if it's a new franchisee coming in, as in that other situation, where we're going to treat it as though we're going from scratch. So that's I could go on and on with examples, I guess, but I'll let that lie there.
Yeah, I mean, my experience in doing this 30 years, it always looks good when you get a press release about, some big franchisee of another system just bought our brand or something like that. At one point, we had like 100-unit franchisee of a full service chain that bought one of our brands. They were the worst operators because they weren't hands-on. Where I've been surprised, sometimes newbies are the best franchisees because they're all in and they're hyper focused on one thing. And as long as you get the personality right, they don't have financial pressure. There's a bunch of other things you got to get right. But some of our most successful franchisees have been newbies, and all they do is enthusiastically follow the system and treat their employees well. But I wanted on that, like, what are some attributes that you can think of in some of your best franchisees, like ones that would be successful in any brand?
Well, you just mentioned something as far as employees, and one is that they really treat their people well.
Yeah.
And I always remind them for years, up until the very end of my tenure, I was involved intimately in every day of discovery. And typically there were groups of franchisees that were coming together because franchise sales are always robust. Sometimes it might be 3 or 4 franchise groups. I remember some 10, 12 franchise groups coming in. And not only was I involved in personal interviews with the groups, but I would do a kickoff presentation, usually spend about 2 hours with them as a group. And part of my talk with them was to remind them that all of their success, as they're sitting there with me at that point, that all of your success is going to depend on strangers. People that, unless you have magically already hired a team, your success depends on people right now you don't even know. Because you will do none of this by yourself. Whether it's one restaurant, and especially if it's more than one restaurant. So we're going to give you tools to inspire, and we're going to inspire you, and we'll play a role in inspiring them too. Joint employer things aside for a moment.
Yeah.
But no, it's up to you, the franchisee, to provide this inspiration and to have them aligned. And those that not everybody pulled it off. And it's I think just so important that that they accomplish that. Those that don't, their businesses are never as good, border on mediocrity, or outright fail. And it can be a little frustrating because it's so obvious.
Yeah.
It shouldn't take a lot to convince me. But some people don't want to do the work. It's being successful in this business is so much more than just investing. And it's got to be a sound investment. One of the main things I've got to do as a franchisor to ensure success is protect the financial model. The financial model is our design. We own that, in that sense. The franchisee doesn't have the latitude to change it. They can just execute. Yeah. And so we got to design it, and we got to protect it, nurture it, improve upon it. We'll always want to improve upon it. But if they stay committed to the playbook, on the financial end of the business too, it's going to get them where they need to be.
Yeah. So, but to summarize, if there was 3 things that make up the best franchisees, the most successful franchisees, like what do you think 3 obvious things are?
Well, I really, I mentioned them. I'll consolidate. Be frugal. So be very smart with your money, value your people, and then embrace the systems that you thought so much of this brand that you were willing to license to use. You do those 3 things. That is, and I would say, as long as you are coupled with a solid, great franchisor, because even a franchisee that does all those things without a successful, good franchisor, then they're handicapped.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a number of things that again, as a franchisor, that you've really got to do well. I would remind franchisees that we're really in 2 different businesses. We have a lot of common interests, but 2 different businesses. Mr. and Mrs. Franchisee, you're in the business of selling subs, to put it simply. I'm in the business of selling franchises. Now, I also have to be great at selling subs. I was always proud of the fact we had a great portfolio of company restaurants. And unlike some systems where company restaurants aren't as good as their franchisees, ours were stellar. There's a great pride in them. They operated extraordinarily well by every quantified measure that we had. I'm sorry, because now I just lost my train of thought. I was so in love with the fact thinking about my company restaurants.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But no, we're just talking about like the attributes of successful franchisees. Like that's key. Like right now, because then we're going to get to franchisors, but this is the stuff that'll be edited out and re-edited back in. But yeah, just know the attributes in your mind, just to summarize, of what makes the best franchisees you can remember.
Yeah. Again, it's being frugal and smart with their money, valuing their people because they can't do it without them, and then embracing those systems, that we've given to them and that they felt were good enough to pay us for the right to use.
Yeah, I'm always surprised too. Franchisors do a good job teaching their franchisees how to do the business itself, make a sub, change the oil, clean a house. Very few franchisors teach franchisees how to become successful multi-unit franchisees and how to actually build a business someday they can sell. And why that's important is, if that person, if he's got a context of every day I'm hustling because I'm building something and growing something, someone's going to also pay me a lot of money for it. It's going to change my life. And then you get a franchisee whose attention is on that business longer. And then at some point they sell to someone who then takes it to the next level. And I'm surprised, like, how did you guys, like, it's a tricky subject, but like, how do you kind of coach franchisees how to go from being good at running a store to good at building a business?
It's a great point, because so many people can struggle with it. And we often almost all the time have to help them with it. But to wax a little philosophical on the industry is bad about this.
Yeah.
I know for a lot of my time coming up through the industry, and again, I've been at it a long time, very often, even within company restaurants in a large system, there's limited preparation for that restaurant manager to all of a sudden go into it. It's not like you're going through the same type of regimented training and learning disciplines about it the same way you did learning individual restaurant operations. It's just this ingrained. I think we get within the industry, so it is such a day-to-day business in so many respects, and that's sort of baked into the culture of it, and we lose sight of that. And then it's finally time to promote the multi-unit person, and then you're just picking out of the best restaurant managers. You kind of see the talent, you think, and they're usually just stepping into it from scratch. So not to say that obviously shouldn't be the case. There should be a lot of more forethought and planning. And I think it's easier to circumvent that type of pattern in the franchisee side. Because unlike when you own your own company operations and you're trying to groom somebody, it's a tricky thing. Do you really want to send a signal out to your whole organization or your team that this is the next person in line to get the spot? And whereas for a franchisee, it's different. You're hopefully signing a deal with them to be a multi-unit operator, and then from day one, preparing them for that. I'll give you an example of lack of preparedness that used to still just frost me, and it is so hard for me to comprehend. We would have numerous times people come into the Firehouse system with restaurant industry experience and have been in multi-unit operations, perhaps. So at higher levels in an organization, they become a Firehouse franchisee. They go into that first restaurant. So maybe they haven't been there in a while, like running a single unit in some time. They're back in that environment. And then we find out they're not doing some of the most basic things from a systems perspective. The one that just aggravated me to no end, which is to find out they're not doing inventory.
No.
Wait a minute. You're not. First of all, don't complain to me about food cost or anything else if you're not doing inventory. The most basic thing you have to do. And you get into a conversation, and you know that they knew better when they were working for a restaurant corporation and doing it as a matter of routine every night, much less weekly, or some weren't even doing a good month-end inventory for their P&L. I mean, it was incredible. And what I assigned that to was when they're back in the unit, especially a modest size operation like a Firehouse Subs. You're in the four walls, and especially if you're really committed, almost everything that's happening within the business is within your sight. It's not like you're in a large casual dining restaurant. And you start to delude yourself into thinking that because everything's in the line of sight, and I only have 15 employees, it's also controllable. Why do I need, who would be stealing from me? If something was going out the back door, I'd be seeing it, on and on and on. And maybe they're right in that single unit. Maybe they're right. And they get a good, loyal team, and none of that happens. But that is not replicable. I can't tell you how many I've said this to in the franchise community because they got off on the wrong foot. It's like, look, you go to open restaurant number 2. No, you need all these systems in place. And if you're not practicing them in your first restaurant, why should we approve you for restaurant number 2, knowing that you don't have the systems in place, that you're going to get your lunch eaten here? And you're thinking that we should allow you to go to 3 to 5 restaurants. With expansion, even with, well, I won't place a caveat on it. For the most part, franchising or expanding, developing more than one restaurant or more restaurants is not a right; it's a privilege. And if we see that someone isn't demonstrating, especially if it comes, let's say if you don't have a development agreement for a moment, I got a 3-unit operator, they're not subscribing to all the systems. They want to do restaurant number 4. And we said, no, you're not demonstrating to us. You're just going to refer any problems that you have, or you may develop problems that you don't have now, because we know from our experience what the basics are. What I always call the science of running a restaurant. There's a science to running restaurants. We've all down on paper what you have to do. Just get really good at the science, because what I find is the more sometimes the more challenging part is the softer side of it, the non-science part of it. Really getting your team motivated embracing the culture, which ends up in the end, by the way, being the separation between being good and great.
Yeah.
Because somebody can just follow the systems. Somebody could have a perfect day in the restaurant, followed every procedure, but it still doesn't mean they were great.
What's the difference between great?
I think I had a formula for it, and especially when it comes to the guest experience. And I've always told our operators, our own team, look, do everything by the book. You want to do everything by the book. But for every guest that walks in the door, aspire to do one thing that's not in the book. Just one. Do one thing that's off script and without breaking rules or anything else. When somebody goes to Firehouse, it's our procedure, it's a standard to say welcome to Firehouse. Say it genuinely. It's not, and
Yeah.
in our brand, we've always done a great job of it. Somebody comes in, you say welcome to Firehouse. I've told operators too. I said, look, if you know it's Fred, say, hey Fred, how you doing? You're okay. I'd rather you do that than welcome to Firehouse. But everybody gets a greeting coming in. Now we don't have a prescription to thank everybody on their way out the door, or one of my favorite sayings is to say, see you tomorrow. Love that. None of that's in the playbook. But that's something different. You're doing a table touch that's not in the script. Any number of things, but just find that one thing. Now, a franchisee can embrace that. They've invested. They've got maybe their whole life riding on this, and they get that, and they would be the one most likely to make that attempt. But they can't touch every guest. They can't, especially once again in multi-unit operations. So they've got to motivate their team. And a team can accomplish it. If they got their team bought in that every day between, if you did your pre-shift huddle, and let's say in Firehouse, you had 6 or 7 people on the floor, you said, hey, let's not let a person get out of here today that we haven't done something special for. You can do it.
Yeah.
But
So I think I'm really big on aligning compensation with what you're trying to get your people to do, right? If you're buying a franchise, 10 units, 5 units, 25 units, at some point you're going to be, because you're not trying to buy a job, and you want to own a company, you need to have a team of people who are building this, not only running it, but like building it. And so you just said the table touch. For the owner, it's easy. Hey, I'm Joe, the Firehouse Sub franchisee in Scottsdale. How you doing? I'm really appreciate you guys being here, right? Well, if I have 10 stores, I can't do that at every shift. But if you align your compensation right and you take care of your people, then all of a sudden they can say, I'm Jeff, the managing partner or whatever. And it's funny because if an average, let's just say 5 guys, right? Or I had 5 guys at one point. If they average $1.2 million, okay, they make a certain amount of profit. All of a sudden they do $1.4 million. Half of that goes right down to the bottom line. If you have an engaged staff, they're likely going to bump your sales up. You're going to more than offset however you're aligning them with your compensation. But I don't know why more people don't get that.
I agree. Because I was always big on promoting the idea of performance-based bonuses. Because in the end, you need the money to pay for it. I sometimes, certain bonus structures, when they get too non-financial result oriented, you're trying to drive certain behaviors, but the bottom line is, if the business isn't profitable, you don't have the money to pay the bonus. So in the end, it all should, I think, come down to that. And there should be great awareness among the team on how the business is doing. I'm big on transparency. Share the P&L. So if I would tell owners, look, if you're not sharing the financial results of your business because you're embarrassed, well, then maybe you should be embarrassed. And I would take it back to, again, that kind of what you said in terms of the crew being and the team being the ones to contribute to it. If you think about, take a step back, if you think about when you go through your annual budgeting process, and you set a budget on you never go over, you don't want to overreach on a plan, right? You want to make sure it's attainable. You're going to budget everything accordingly. So you come up with your forecast, come up with your budget for the year. Well, let's say it's $1 million. And you realize that, look, to the degree that there could be a number of factors that cause you to overperform. But one of the most likely scenarios for overperformance is what the team does. So all right, using a 50% contribution margin, uh, if 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 they're going to be the ones who drive that, let's give them a big piece of it. Because in the absence of them doing it, the absence of them creating that result, I have nothing.
Yeah.
So there's various ways to skin that cat and create it, but kindred spirits here with you on this. I'm just a big proponent of trying to reward the team for making that effort, and again, being very transparent on the
Yeah.
financial results of the business.
Yeah, transparency. I remember like with Five Guys, we would actually disclose every week everybody's sales and their secret shopper scores. And there's a correlation between those because immediately everyone gets embarrassed on one of those two things. And so then they both improve. But the think about it, if you're trying to build and sell your franchise company to somebody, if the whole business relies on you to do everything anyways, no one's ever going to buy it, right? So you may as well take really good care of your team, make sure that they're not going anywhere. Not only not going anywhere, they're trying to further the business because they have a vested interest in that. So I mean, I think that that's really good advice. Let's shift to franchisors. So I know, just because we're constantly talking to new franchisors to potentially work with, there's this weird unexplained irony where some franchisors hate their franchisees, actually look at them like they're a necessary evil, right? And it doesn't make any sense because a franchisee prepays you to come in your system. They pay you to stay, like with royalties and rebates or whatever. They prove your brand in other markets. They have to follow your whims, right? If all of a sudden you add meatloaf or cupcakes, they have to do that. They have to keep running their stores in whatever condition your agreement says it's supposed to be in. And eventually, when you sell your parent company someday, they get none of that, right? And so, like, I don't understand why franchisors don't, I mean, they almost look at them like a necessary evil. But I mean, any advice that you have for franchisors, if you want to build a healthy franchise system, do
Yeah,
what?
yeah, I hear you, and it starts with the obvious, which is, for the business, for the brand to be successful, both the franchisor and the franchisee have to be successful. One can't be successful without the other. So I love our franchisees. There are some franchisees I didn't love, usually if they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. But by and large, I loved all our franchisees. And now you have to, let me back up. One thing I thought was important in the relationship, I always felt it was incumbent upon me to earn the respect of my franchisees. For me personally, and then for my system, for my team, and my team needed to earn their respect. And I say always respect the franchisee's investment, and particularly when I'm talking to my team members. Remember, you're investing your time. You're making Firehouse your livelihood. My employees are, my team members are, but the franchisees put skin in the game, and that earns a definite level of respect from us. And it gives them the right to have their opinion and make their opinion known. Doesn't mean we always are going to agree, but they've got the right. As long as they're doing it respectfully, they're owed that. They're owed that audience. And I would always look for ways, again, to try to make sure that they understood that I value them. The most poignant example of that, there were several key things that I did along the line over the course of the brand history to make sure to retain that respect. But the biggest one was really during the pandemic, because when the pandemic struck, I remember that first weekend, our sales were blended for, it was March 13th. I remember it was a Friday. Over that weekend, we were like 28% negative. And that wasn't sustainable. We had none of us had any idea what was going to happen, but I knew that is not sustainable and this could get worse. So that Monday morning, 4 days into this, and thankfully, because we were very frugal as a franchisor, we had no debt, we had plenty of cash. I told the franchise community that I was suspending all royalty and advertising payments. Now, I just deferring it. I said, but hey, we have no idea, because I knew 28%, which soon became 40%, 45% negative, that is not sustainable. We are in the absence of some crystal ball that tells me when we're getting out of this, that is not sustainable. There was no PPP yet, none of this. I said, we'll have restaurants potentially closing in droves. We could lose hundreds. And our founders have lost years worth of work and value out of the business. So that Monday, I said, we're not collecting anything. You keep all the money in your pocket. We got to make your business as sustainable as possible. We're okay right now for us. You keep, and that, of course, I was walking the talk. I mean, they knew that I valued their business. There was self-interest in it, obviously, because I was looking strategically down the road, knowing this is going to kill us if restaurants start closing. And my ask of them, by the way, was because I was willing to do everything it took to help them keep restaurants open. And I needed them to commit to doing everything possible to keep their restaurants open.
Yeah.
And they did. And we had a handful, and I think one hand, I could say the number of restaurants that closed.
Yeah.
For any reason. And, but then the greatest reward came as we get through the pandemic. I remember it was, we got out of the woods. We were back to running positive comp sales after 10 weeks, which was unbelievable in terms of how our system rallied and the way I coached them up and the things that we did. But we got to a point after about 3 months in, people started asking, well, what are you, because I'm still at first not collecting the royalty, and then started to, based on their performance. I didn't start, because not everybody, it wasn't equal. There were some that were still struggling more. I didn't take their royalty. Those where sales are recovered, I started implementing royalty and ad payments back in. So everybody was curious. So what have you done? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I waited until about August. And I got with the founders and I had an ask of them, because we were, at that point, we were doing great. And on our way towards, my gosh, in 2021, we had our comps were plus 22%. And that was part of that. We were comping over the pandemic, but we were only negative 10 weeks. I mean, this was huge increases that we enjoyed in 2021. So I went to the founders with an ask. I said, look, I want to forgive all the royalty.
Write it off.
Write it off.
Wow.
Because I said, because events like this may happen once in our lifetime. That's it. And when they do, something totally out of your control, and you rise to the occasion, you do all the right things. I said, we don't need the money. It's like about $5 million in deferred. And we don't need it. We're doing okay. And I've got this once in a lifetime opportunity to earn such goodwill with our franchise community by saying, no, don't worry about it. You've been through a lot. We've all been through a lot, but we're not going to collect.
No, it started from a place of compassion. You were originally compassionate and not taking the money. COVID was just such a weird nightmare. I think most people have just tuned it out of their head because nobody knew what was coming next or how to deal with it. You and I were on the NRA board at that time, and it was just a weird thing. But it started from a place of compassion where you're looking out for your franchisees. And then, later it was something that got you some good credit or credibility, some goodwill. But no, that's a franchisor that cares about their franchisees. I actually know franchisors who didn't do that. And it's like, because they were coming from a place of scarcity too. Oh my God, the world's falling. I need to get money. And you guys went the other way. It's like, no, it's all, I mean, you're either for your franchisee success or you're not.
Yeah. And it's hard to understand the ones that aren't, because again, there's nothing that, not over the long term, no good comes of it. And, and that can be one of the challenges, I think, in some companies, some businesses is, when you've got a management team over the brand that's in it for the long term, you think long term. If a company has a situation where it's short term mentality, then you're fighting headwinds and interests that can be very, very difficult to overcome, and then bitterness on the part of the franchisee because they're in it for the long haul.
Yeah,
and it's so there's I think a lot to be said for. No, whether it's a large company, small company, as a franchisor, doesn't matter. There's a lot to be said for continuity and stability within the management team. It comes down to relationships. One of the greatest feelings I had in my long career was when I decided to retire from Firehouse, and I had a chance to speak at our franchise conference, which we always call the family reunion, and so having that opportunity to address them on stage that final time, and then just the how should I put it, the amount of warmth that came back from everybody during those couple of days that we were there was tremendous.
Yeah.
It was taking into account financial gains, everything else. It was the best feeling in the world to know that after 20 years of the brand, people in the room that I've known for 20 years and helped them in their business over that long a period of time, that there was that mutual level of respect and emotion
Yeah.
about it.
No, it doesn't always go that way. And I think that that's something that a franchisor should aspire for. It's like, someday when they sell their company and they go back to visit them later, that people actually love them more and appreciate them. What, if you could have, like, just sort of looking back at your entire 20 years, is there anything like you can point to that you wish you did differently? Or is there like you mentioned course correcting, is there something that you could have done to get where you were better,
Yeah,
faster?
yeah. I think there's. I can think of three things, which I'll preface this by saying we obviously did a lot of things right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got to reach a little bit more, but sometimes I'm my own harshest critic. And so one of the things is very much about me, and that even though I think I was highly effective as a CEO within the brand, I think I would have even been better if I'd spent a little more time, especially in the earlier years, in restaurant operations within Firehouse. You're never going to be the best hook and ladder maker or anything else. But during my 23 years with Burger King, I prided myself on just being a stud when it came to restaurant operations. That's where I came up through the system. I spent several years running Burger King restaurants and then multi-unit management. Took the fairly typical career path. I spent 6 years in R&D, which I learned a lot about everything. It was very valuable. But at the root, I was an operations guy, and I knew everything about the restaurant in detail and never lost it. In fact, when I left R&D after 6 years, I felt I needed to go back to the field because I was getting a little rust. And even though I was at the forefront of implementing things, like coming up with systems, it's still not the same as when you're in there executing it. I said,
Yeah.
now, I've got to get more reality based and get back in. So when I came to Firehouse, it was an executive role. And for one reason or another, I didn't immerse myself in the same way. And looking back on it, I wish I had. I was able to restaurants and QSR are similar enough between concepts, frankly, on a lot of the basis of what you have to do that. Yeah, for me, I was always able to take all that hands-on experience of Burger King. I was able to parlay that over into credibility at Firehouse. But I would have been even better in my discussions and so on with franchisee, maybe even with staff if I'd done that. So that's one thing. The second thing, even though I feel we were pretty discerning with franchisees, we could have been more discerning on candidates.
Say no more.
I think looking back on it, I think we convinced ourselves we were being more discerning than we were.
Yeah.
So I would take a different approach. In some cases, it may have slowed growth down in the short term, but I think it would have been helpful in the long term if we had been more discerning.
It's so true. One bad apple spoils the bunch. And then if you have a bunch of bad apples, I mean, they're cancerous to the whole company. And that fee that you got, some people do it because, I got to get the fee. I got to, get a press release. I got to get a flag plan in this new city. That franchisee struggles or fails or closes. You can't hide that with the internet. You can't hide that. And that franchisee is not going anywhere. Anyone could reach him for your sales guys tried to steer the reference calls in a certain direction, and all you got to do is Google, right? So no, you're right. And that's, I'm guilty of the same thing over the years. There's some people I wish that we didn't sell franchises to, or if you did, at least be honest with yourself what their gaps are and spend extra time and energy insulating them with the stuff that they're missing. But Yeah, I mean, otherwise you got no one to blame but yourself if you let them in. You
Right.
let the wrong people do the wrong things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you know,
well,
the third thing I would have done, and I don't know exactly what the avenue would have been here, but I and this probably is more on me. I think that I could have been more aggressive on trying to earn additional investment into the brand by our ownership team. It was there were they invested millions over the years. So compared to a lot of franchisors, they invested tremendous amount. I mentioned about the $5 million on the
yeah.
in the end that wasn't coming out of my pocket. That was out of our founders. Um, but I think there's even more we could have done in the right places that could have accelerated development a bit more than what we did. I have great respect for what Jersey Mike's is doing.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
Peter's done. That's probably the penultimate example of it. And I know, as from what I know, through a securitization of the business back a few years ago, and boy, that has paid off to such an obvious degree. And So I think there's some lessons there. I think franchisors in the future, in the years ahead, would do well to study his playbook a bit. Now, one of the things that's very exciting for me now, after having retired, and with RBI, Restaurant Brands International, having new ownership, is they've already started to make investments on a level above what uh, we had done
Oh, good. Good.
during my time at Firehouse.
Hey,
So,
hey, you mentioned Peter. What are two or three things that he does that's different, unique, and more people should emulate?
well, I think that again, I'll go back to these investments that he's made lately. He famously now, I think it was 75 grand per restaurant they put in for remodels. And I remember when I first saw that in the news, I thought, oh, all right, what's the catch? Yeah, but I did discover that was the real deal. In every restaurant that was getting the remodel, and that cash was going up there and going in, and there's a couple of Jersey Mike's operators I knew well enough to at least get their opinion, and like, is this for real? Yeah, it's for real, and we love
Ah,
them.
ah. I've never met an unhappy Jersey Mike's franchisee. In fact, like I just saw an article the other day where like once a year he awards a franchise to like a good ops person, right? I mean, that's fantastic. Like you're taking your very best ops people and making them your franchisees. In hindsight, you wish every single franchisee was your very best ops person. So it's like, why not do that? It's a smart investment, but too many people are short-sighted to see that. And then, I've also heard I've heard other things like when he gives away a franchise, that's one less store that an existing franchisee can build. So he makes it up to them some way. And it's just like,
Mm.
man alive. Like you hear good things about Peter. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And he's been. I know he was very involved in the IFA for quite a few years. He had a. It was interesting. Is just on a from a peer standpoint. I was always involved Firehouse very heavily in the National Restaurant Association, and we were IFA members, of course, and maybe some earlier years I was personally more active within the IFA. But you kind of have to pick your lane. And I was always big on advocacy for the sake of the industry, and
Yep.
in
Yep.
obviously impacting Firehouse by doing that as well. But that was the lane that I picked, and contemporaneously with that, he took Jersey Mike's down the IFA lane on the franchising side of the business. I think we both did very well with the routes that we took. But
Yeah.
he, of course, he's had the brand since 1970s, I think. I think he was 17 years old.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, he's sole owner of the business. So there's a lot to be respected there. It's a bit easier to do what he did when it's a one vote system.
Yeah.
For-
Yeah. No,
for-
he's one of the last living legends. That's for sure. For like someone who actually started his chain, still has something that big that he owns. That's fantastic. Well,
yeah.
Don, I appreciate it. This has been great hearing your story and getting some wisdom from you. And no, I mean that's kind of where I'm at right now. I want to help franchisees and franchisors become more successful by learning from successful franchisees and franchisors. So much appreciated. Thank you very much.
That's my pleasure.
Anything I left off or anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, there is one while I'm thinking of it, because I was talking about the culture of the brand, and I think what's been a great unifying factor, and I think a key for success in our system was what we do in the community through the Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation, and that was our most successful franchisees. In fact, we showed empirically through research on a number of occasions how that connecting thread with the community was the biggest factor driving sales. Now, that isn't the reason we do it. To help save lives and our commitment to public safety and being founded by firefighters. But that really is, in the end, probably the most meaningful thing that we do. So much about building businesses. And I'll tell a little story. Back when we were courting an advertising agency, TRG, founder was Stan Richards. And when we were in this initial conversation, he asked a question of us, myself, founders, some of our other executives. He said, look, if Firehouse ceased to exist, what difference would it make? And we said, well, yeah, there's plenty of places to get a sandwich. But what would happen is if as a result of Firehouse going away, there was no Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation, which by now has donated almost $90 million in life-saving equipment. Well, the shame of the brand going away and the foundation is there would be lives that are lost in the absence of it. So that, in the grand scheme of things, is really the best reason to get up in the morning. And Firehouse may be a little bit unique in that respect, but when you get your team and you get the franchise community rallied around something like that, that can be the secret sauce.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that's invisible, but it's very, very real, which is how someone feels about you. It's not what they say or it's not what you say. Sometimes it's not even what they articulate. It's just how they feel about you. So like your example that you used about the royalties during COVID or your foundation, right? I mean, think about your employees, how they feel about you as a company because you're doing that for the foundation, or think about how all your other franchisees, when you're not even in the room, they're talking about that. Like it's how they feel about you. So yeah, I mean, I it's one of these things we try to tell every franchisor when they're always asking for best practice. It's like, here's a bunch of things. And it's like, they want to do half of them, but not all. And that's why so few people get to $1 billion.
Yeah. Well, and if I might too, I just, because I'm a big believer in, and I preach what I call mission orders. And I think this is essential for another way of saying it is don't micromanage, et cetera. But, get the mission order out there that you want people to accomplish. And very often for our operators, for the experience in the restaurant, it's really simple. The mission is make sure that the guest feels better when they leave than they did when they came in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And making it known what you're doing in the community is part of that, about feeling better, that I contributed to something else when I spent my dollars there, that I was able to donate when I came in, that the food was really nourishing, that, it was good for me. How many times do people go into some type of restaurants out of necessity or for reasons that when they leave, they don't feel they've done anything good for themselves?
Yeah.
And they don't feel better when they left. They satisfied some basic need, but they really don't feel better about it. And when you arrive at that point, and it's about the feeling, as you mentioned, then you've got a big part of the formula nailed down.
Good. Well, you ought to be proud of everything you've done. I mean, the whole goal here is to get wealthy, helping people get wealthy, right? And you guys built a great big business, and that tide lifted a lot of boats. Yeah. You guys made a lot of people successful in the process, and it sounds like you guys have done a lot of good, and there's a lot of good things that I hope people take from this. So Don, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan.
We'll see you soon. Hey, thanks for tuning in to Smart Franchising with FranSmart. I'm your host, Dan Rowe. If you enjoyed today's episode, this podcast is only going to get better. Please like, comment, and subscribe to hear more from the most successful franchisors and franchisees, and we'll see you next time.